Hey there friends, and thanks for joining me again, and today I want to share with you my take on heat retention cooking. Heat retention cooking is actually a really cool skill that I think everybody should know, at least how to do it. It's basically cooking without having to keep the heat coming, if that makes sense. It's cooking by retaining the heat or by insulating. So basically, in a nutshell, you would bring something up to a temperature and then you would hold that heat in without providing additional heat, and then the food continues to cook that way. Pretty cool, actually. It's definitely nothing new. People have been doing it for, who knows how many years. I mean, the early settlers did it. They were coming across, the United States back when it wasn't even the United States. They would dig a pit. They would put some dried beans in there, heat it up on, their wood fireplace or whatever, their open fire. And then they would actually bury their Dutch ovens underneath the ground and then leave it to cook for a whole day so that their beans would be ready for the next day. The Boy Scouts actually do that same thing even still to this day. They actually did a version of this back in the Great Depression. They would take a box or something like that and then put hay in it, and then they would cook that way. So yeah, it's actually been used a lot over time, and a lot of different people have used it for a lot of different reasons. It helps reduce how much electricity or energy in general that you're using, and it can also, have a lot of other benefits. So anyway, people who would maybe want to use it today would be more like people who are being prepared for disasters. Say you live in an area where there's tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes or whatever, having some extra food on hand and, the ability to cook it would probably be important for people like that. Or power outages just in general, whether they're caused by heavy snow like we get here, or wind, or an EMP or a solar flare even. Those would all be good reasons to want to know how to heat retention cook. Or even just something simple like, say you've gone out camping and you realize you didn't bring enough propane. Well, this could definitely help you as well. Help you cook everything you need to with a less, propane than you would normally have. Or something even just as simple as everyday uses, like you just want to in general cut down on energy consumption and energy costs, or even keep the heat out of your house, because on a day like today it's supposed to be in the upper 90s. It's pretty warm. I really don't want a whole lot of heat in the house, so that's why I'm doing it with you today. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. There are some heat retention cookers that you can actually buy, but my take on it, the one I'm going to show you today, actually uses all materials that you likely already have in your house right now. You don't actually have to buy anything. It's just taking the stuff that you already have and then turning it into a heat retention cooker, and you don't even have to modify your stuff. It actually makes it to where you can still use the things, which I'm going to show you in a second how to put it together. Use the things that you already have, and then they can go back to their regular uses. So it's actually really neat. So yeah, the recipe that I'm going to do with you is a stew. And so basically the key thing that you do is you bring it up to boil for a few minutes, and then you put it in your heat retention cooker. And then you leave it there. Now this is the key. There's two keys to making, a heat retention cooker work. The first one is that you double the cook time. So if the recipe I'm going to show you here in a second takes about 45 minutes if you were cooking it on the stove. I'm going to double that, and then I'm going to leave it in the heat retention cooker for an hour and a half. So that's number one key to making your recipe work for a heat retention cooker. And then the second thing is that you want to actually reduce the amount of water that you're going to use in it. Because if you were boiling something on the stove for 45 minutes, you're going to actually have a lot of evaporation, but the heat retention cooker doesn't have that same amount of evaporation. So what you're going to want to do is back off the water slightly. So again, that's number two. So what we're going to do, again, double the cook time, leave it in for an hour and a half. The recipe I'm about to show you would normally take about 12 to 15 cups of water. Well, I'm going to add 10 or 11 so that there's not as many, cups of water to account for all of that evaporation that we're actually not going to have using that heat retention cooker. So yeah, the recipe again I'm going to do with you would normally have to cook for 45 minutes. When you could just bring it up to boil for a few minutes and then throw it in your heat retention cooker, say I boil it for 2 to 3 minutes, maybe even 4 at the very most. Well, that's actually 10 times as much energy used to cook it on the stove as it is in the heat retention cooker. You see how what I mean, how useful it is? So if you were out camping and you were running low on propane, if you were to use this heat retention cooker method, you could actually use 10 times less propane than you would normally need. Or again, if you know it was that power outage or whatever and you're really trying to conserve how much propane you have on your little propane stove, by utilizing this heat retention cooker method, you can use 1/10 of the propane with each and every meal, thus making what you have last a whole lot longer. So this is, again, a really important skill that I really hope that you can benefit from. So you can make a lot of different things in it. You can make, soup or stew, even pasta, quinoa, rice, pretty much anything. You can even make, again, dried beans, like I mentioned in the beginning of the recipe. Pretty much almost anything that you can make on the stove top, the recipe can be adapted by using those two, keys I just told you and using it in the heat retention cooker. So let me go ahead and show you how I put that together right now. Okay, so here's how this actually works. I'm doing this with the pot empty because if I did this with the stew already started, this is going to be really super hot and would be a lot less fun to work with. So just for showing you how this whole setup works, I'm doing a dry run, if you want to call it that, by just, doing it without the stew for now. But I'm going to start the stew in a minute and then we'll do it exactly like this, just with it hot at that time. So first you start with your cooler, whatever size cooler you have. You're going to need a fairly large one though, big enough to hold whatever pot it is you have. The next thing you're going to want to do is, acquire blankets, whatever, towels, just different types of stuff. You can even use old pillows if your cooler's big enough for it, but anything you can use to help insulate the cooler. So what I do is I take a nice big heavy pot, and then with a nice tight fitting lid, ideally it wouldn't have this right here, but I'm working with what I have. So if you have a lid without a hole in it, that would be better actually. That holds in the heat better than this one does, but I'm working again with what I have. So I've put a towel in the bottom. That's important so you don't burn your cooler. And then you're also going to want to put towels on the sides so that you don't burn your cooler with your pot touching the sides. And then once you get that, basically once you have your stew all boiled for a couple of minutes, you're going to pop it in here. So you have them on the bottom, you have them on the sides, all sides, and then you're going to want to put some more in just to kind of stack them up on top and make sure the cooler is really nice and full to where there's lots and lots of insulation around. So get it really good and full to where it's like completely covered so that your cooler is, quite, again, full of all of the insulation. And then you're going to pop on the lid. And then the last step is to make sure the lid stays closed by putting something heavy on top. So I'm going to go ahead and use this just to kind of weigh it down, and then you walk away. Okay, so for the demonstration today, I'm going to be making a stew I call survival stew. And the reason I call it that is because it uses all shelf-stable stuff that you could keep on hand anytime, and then whenever some sort of an emergency arises, you have everything you need to be able to make it. Of course, it can be made with, fresh ingredients in place of a lot of these shelf-stable items, but for the recipe I'm going to be showing you today, it's just with all these shelf-stable items. So it's going to use half a packet of these green lentils. So this is a 2-pound package, just 1 pound of these. And then this Augason Farms Vegetable Stew Blend. Have you ever seen this stuff? It's like long-term storage kind of stuff. That's why they market it for emergencies. So basically it's good. A lot of their stuff is good for 20 or 25 years from the time they package it. And it's because they put it in this big can with like an oxygen absorber in here, and so it makes it to where the food can last a really, really, really long time without going bad. So this is kind of cool. You can throw some of this in your basement or whatever, and then be prepared for an emergency in the event of something happening, so you don't always have to keep a ton of groceries on hand and stuff that could go bad, especially if it were like, an electric outage or something like that. If you stock a lot of bread and eggs and stuff like that, that stuff can go bad really easily, whereas this, like I said, usually lasts about 20 or 25 years, and they have all kinds of different stuff. So yeah, if you haven't heard of this stuff, maybe go check it out. So it's going to use about a whole cup of this vegetable stew blend, a can of tomatoes, a whole teaspoon of cumin, coriander, and garlic powder, and then about a half a teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And then, of course, I adjust the seasoning as needed later on. I probably throw some parsley in there too, but I'm not sure how much I use of that. Probably a teaspoon or 2. So yeah, I'm going to get all of this in the pot and get it up to a boil. appropriate amount of time has passed and it's time to check on it and see if it worked. So there are two things we want to do, obviously, to make sure that everything is cooked correctly. It's actually really warm, of course. We want to make sure that it is cooked to where it tastes tender, and we also want to check it for food safety temps to make sure that that is appropriately done as well. So let's get in here. Alright, that should be good. There we go. Alright, so test number one. Let's test the lentils and make sure they are tender. Here, would you like a bite? Just kidding. Yep. Definitely tender. And then the second thing we want to do is temp the food, of course. So let's do that and make sure that that's done as well. Just a quick reminder of food safety guidelines. The temperature between 40 and 140 is a danger zone. That is where, you know, bacteria and things can grow. So above 140 is a safe holding temperature for vegetarian meals like this, vegetables, lentils, things like that. That's all safe. So it has to be at least 140. For beef, lamb, veal, things like that, you can cook to 145. Ground meats should be cooked to 160, as well as eggs. And then poultry has to be cooked to 165. So let's see if this was acceptable. 188. So even in the hour and a half, this is definitely well maintained, a high enough temperature that it's fully safe. Like I said earlier, you can even do dried beans and stuff like that because it really does hold the heat in very, very well. So you don't have any worries about it not cooking to a safe temperature. So there you go. This hopefully this video was helpful to you, even if it's not something you can put into practice right now. Maybe it's something you could, you know, file away in your brain or whatever in case, you know, the right situation arises where this information would be helpful to you. Frugal Green Girl, we'll see you next time.